Chapter 41. At the Edge. Mom? For the first time since he'd gotten to the hospital, Stiles was able to clearly see what was in front of him. For the first time that night, he was able to feel the cold wind brush against his skin. It definitely was a welcome sensation, but he couldn't take the time to celebrate it for the comfort it brought. At the very far edge of the roof stood a woman, or at least that was what that figure appeared to be. She donned a hospital gown. All he could distinguish about her hair was its length and the fact that its color was on the dark side of shades. He didn't see her face, but there was no need to. He instinctively knew who she was, that entire scene being way too familiar for him not to. "Why are you looking at me like that?" She almost growled that question at him. "Mom, it's me." He desperately tried. "I know who you are. I know what you're here to do." She spat furiously. "No. Oh, Mom, Please. Get away from the edge." He shakily reached his hand out towards her. Stiles took the humble number of 2 steps in her direction before she shrieked, "Stay away." "Mom, I'm not here to hurt you," he muttered, the weight of his aching feelings gradually muffling his voice. "Yes, you are. I've seen the way you look at me. Do you think I'm stupid? I know you were trying to kill me." She vomited all those words at once, leaving him no chance to place any of his own. Gasping, for a moment she appeared to be losing her balance, her upper half dangerously bent and dangled forward over the far down ground. Her arms could do nothing but flail wretchedly through the thin air around her, in an attempt to keep her body from falling. Stiles didn't hesitate the fraction of a second and darted her away. But when he got close enough to her body suddenly stopped all the forms of gymnastics he was performing in order to keep her on the edge. And she simply stood still and straight, like nothing had happened at all. He immediately froze, not very fond of his odds with that thing anymore. He began to think less and less of her as his mother. Then again he thought that if he was still dreaming, then that thing was absolutely a trap. The nogitsuné knew how much of a sore spot his mother was for him, and he was using her to make Stiles' experience more agonizing for the sake of its own sick pleasure. After all, if a nogitsuné could fulfill any purpose, it was its ability to bring strife and chaos to fruition. The woman disguised as Stiles' mother began to slowly and steadily turn around on her heels. Once face to face with him, she finally stopped the rotation. He couldn't believe his eyes. He truly had every trait from his actual mother, exactly like he'd remembered her on her best days. He got completely lost in her deeply loving eyes, mesmerized by her radiant and genuinely warm smile. He let his emotion get the best of him, and all of his thoughts about it being a trap flew into a puff of smoke all of a sudden. She unhurriedly lifted her hand and took his cheek right into her palm. It didn't feel as cold as he'd expected it to be, nor did it feel too warm either. In fact, it just felt perfect. She gently tilted her head after that, smiling sadly, her eyes increasingly filling with a transparent liquid before his gaze, until her eye sockets became too small to hold it all in, for one tear to finally escape them and roll freely. "I know who you are. You are my son, my baby," she murmured between her cries. "Mom, He spoke softly, unable to hold his tears back any longer. He had the impression that somebody had protruded their hand right through his chest, squeezing a fistful of his respiratory system. He couldn't breathe regularly, but not out of fear, sorrow, or even despair. It was all of those combined in one giant, crushing ball. The fear that moment wouldn't last. Sorrow for all the years he'd spent parted away from her, and despair, because despite all of his hopes, he knew that none of it was real, and that it could end at any moment. He'd lose her again. Do you want to stay with me, Stiles? Her smile seemed a tad less sad than the previous one she'd offered. She looked hopeful while asking. What? He couldn't believe his ears. Only a few milliseconds before, he was contemplating the end of that moment, and there she was, with that question out of the blue. Do you want us to be together again, like we used to be before it all went downhill? She said. I do. Mom, of course I do, but, stuttered. We can. There is a way, Stiles, for us to finally be happy. You just need to give me your hand. She stretched her arm out to him and opened her hand, waiting for him to take it. He hesitated for a short while before admitting how all of it was too tempting for him to resist. So he slowly reached his hand at this turn. She closed her soft fingers around his own as soon as they touched, then began to seamlessly and delicately pull him towards herself. Stiles drew small steps closer to the edge of the hospital roof with her, until they both stood on the same line. See? It's very easy. There is only one step left, and then we'll be together forever, she grinned. What step? He asked, his voice weak. We need to jump from this edge together, Stiles. Chapter 42. Timely. I never thought I'd say this, but I miss this place, said the woman. She sounded on the older side and also had a bit of an accent. Are we late? Asked the young-sounding man standing a few feet behind her. He was much taller than the rest of the group. They were all covered by long black robes, their faces safely hidden underneath oversized hoods. No, I believe we are right on time. A different man emerged from their midst. He walked past all of them towards the front. He didn't sound very old, but he sure had a mature timbre, and spoke with more certainty and confidence than the previous male. It has already started. I can feel it, said a young woman from the back of the line. What are we waiting for exactly? Asked the same young man from before. The signal. I know that. I meant, what is the signal? He asked again. You'll know when you hear it. Another young woman gave him the answer. She stood right beside him. Dying in a fight, then rising from the afterlife right into another fight. How deplorable. The woman that had first spoken voiced her opinion again. I hear we're not the only ones back from the dead. I hope they brought back the ones that killed me. We are not here for our pesky personal desires of revenge. Do not forget that, the wiser-sounding man said. It's no fun then. Do you all have your coordinates? Yeah, most of them said in unison, and most of those that did sounded pretty young. And remember, if we fail, then all of this would have been for nothing. Yeah, we won't even get to enjoy our second chance at life. What about you, Deucalion? I'd heard that you vowed to never get involved in a fight again. Not at all, my dear Satomi. I vowed to never take a soul, not to never fight. The two oldest members of the group had finally addressed each other by name. "You that, people? He doesn't want to take another soul," scoffed the young man that had been silent until that point. "We all made our fair share of mistakes," replied Satomi. "Well, some of us made slightly graver mistakes than others, so it would be really nice not to put all of us in the same load." The young woman that stood at the very back spoke again, although she sounded more aggravated than before. "Still angry at me, I see," said Deucalion. "You kind of killed us, so don't hold your breath for forgiveness." Now the tall man spoke. "Technically, I didn't. It's up for technicalities now." She stopped for a moment before continuing. "If I thought I had a chance at killing you, I'd have done it the moment you rose from the grave. But you learned your lesson. I'm glad you wisened up, Erica," said Deucalion again. At those words, the tall man that stood beside Erica lost his temper and dashed towards Deucalion. But the other members of the group stood in his way. "Calm down, Boyd. Now is not the time for this." "Shh! Listen," said Satomi in a hushed voice. She extended her ear to the night. If dead quiet had a sound, it would have been that. It felt like nothing around them was alive anymore, like it all died in an instant or went silent, in anticipation for something much more important than any chirping it'd make. The forest didn't sound like a forest anymore. "What is it? I can't hear anything." "I can feel it. It's coming our way," said the other young woman. They all looked down, sensing some sort of vibration crawling their way through the ground. Then all of a sudden, a loud and ear-piercing shriek arose. It sounded so far yet so close. "It's Lydia," said one of the young men with a shaky voice. He recognized the voice of a banshee he knew once upon his lifetime. "I suppose that is the signal?" "I believe so. Let us all meet again, once our mission's accomplished. Stay alive," muttered Satomi, before they all scattered apart, for they all had somewhere to be. Chapter 43. 20 minutes away. 20 minutes before sunrise. "What's happening?" mumbled Braden, her vision still blurry. She struggled to rise back to her feet. She slowly lifted her head. Everything around her sounded surreal. The screams of agony, the gunshots and explosions were blaring loudly in the background, brutalizing her brain. The vision had finally cleared, only for her to lay eyes on Nolan, right as he shot a long tail that was threateningly approaching them through the heart. He turned his head towards her upon hearing the question. Finally awake. "Where are Scott and Chris?" she asked as she stood up. "Out. There's someone out there that they knew. They asked me to stay here with you." "Well, I'm awake now. Thanks for having my back. We should go. You probably need us," she added. She held her weapon up, ready to shoot as they exited the mansion, Nolan walking closely behind her. Chaos was still unfolding outside. More and more patroller vehicles were showing up. The door would fly open, and the deputies would immediately begin emptying their chambers in the creatures before them. Most of them only got to fire a small number of shots before they were rendered dead, too slow to rival with the speed of the long-tails. Brayton shot one through the heart, right on time to save the deputy from imminent death. "This is turning into a bloodbath," she uttered. "I think it already is one," the response came from Nolan. "We need to find Scott, and fast," she said. Nolan pulled a small device from his pocket, pushed on a button, only for the screen to light up. He swiped on it a few with his thumb and awakened Brayden's curiosity with that. "What are you doing?" "It's a tracker. It links me to Chris, Mason, and Corey. This way," he answered before dashing forward, leaving no choice for Brayden but to follow. Chris wasn't very far. It was time that appeared to be his enemy in that situation. He was surrounded by 3 longtails, determined to erase him before moving on. He was fast enough to take one down as it was closing in on him, but not enough to dodge the hit he received from the one behind him. He dropped to the floor, leaving an opening for the second longtail to act. But right before it could sink its monstrous claws deep into Chris's chest, it was stopped by the shot fired from Nolan's gun, while Brayden quickly took care of the other monster. "Are you all right?" Nolan hastened to his side, worried. "Yeah, I'll live," said Chris. "Where's Scott?" Brayden asked. "He ran after the creature that controls these monsters," he said. "He wouldn't just leave you here like that." "Well, he didn't really have a choice. It was either that or I die. The one that controls these is a lot stronger than the rest, isn't he? Otherwise he would have just shot him," said Nolan. "I did shoot him, right through the heart. It did nothing." Chris sounded like he couldn't fathom or believe his own words. "We can't just let him deal with it alone," added Brayden. "I'm not sure we can do anything to help him," said Chris, his head bowed down. "I think we'll hold him back more than anything," stated Nolan. Not much cogitation was necessary for Brayden to agree with the both men. All they had were their guns, and if those didn't work against the leader of the Longtails, then there was no place for them in that fight. They would truly just stand in Scott's way. Scott would have agreed too, had he been with them. He hoped that Chris found a way to save himself as he ran through the dark forest. There wasn't much hope to cling on to at that time. All he could do was run after Matt. Matt kept mocking and teasing him all the way through. Scott could catch a glimpse of him up front from time to time, and he would disappear for a while before showing up again. He just kept on darting forward, doubts creeping in through the cracks of his mind, an intrusion he couldn't push away. He wondered how he was going to deal with Matt once he caught up with him, pondered on a way to neutralize him, or at worst, take him down. He wasn't going to hide sunlight with a fishnet. He'd always doubted his powers as an alpha. When it came to brute force, he wasn't sure he could stand in the same league as Deucalion or the Beast of Gévaudan. He'd always, in a way, admired their raw power from afar. Even though they had been enemies in the past, he could never deny the truth of it. He was afraid to falter. He feared his determination wouldn't suffice, dreaded the idea that his burning desire to protect his friends and loved ones would never be enough, not that time around. What is the point of being a true alpha if you can't beat one miserable man-made creature? Tell me that. I need to know. Matt interrupted his thoughts in the middle. Scott immediately stopped, realizing he'd arrived in a clearing. Matt still lurking in the shadows. Don't have an answer? Thought so, really. Can't say I expected much from you. He spoke again. Scott preferred to remain silent, to focus on his environment, to listen, but most importantly, think. Matt was playing on his weaknesses, his doubts and fears. Unfortunately, that wasn't his only weapon. He had the powers to back up the talk. Chapter 44. 15 minutes away. 15 minutes before sunrise. Anas and Kali were stealthily converging towards a common point behind a considerably large metal container. For how long do you think he'll be able to hide, Derek? Asked Jennifer. She was still standing in her spot, unmoved. The two werewolves advancing suddenly stopped, an air of confusion plastered on their faces. An air that didn't go unnoticed by Jennifer. What is it? Instead of words, actions answered her question. It all happened very fast. A black fluffy shape jumped out of that blind spot and landed right onto Kali. She dropped to the floor, struggling to get rid of whatever had her arm clutched in its jaws. Anas ran forward and grabbed the animal, only to swing it away a few seconds after that. It didn't take them much time to distinguish what it was. It was a large black wolf. It stood on all fours again and stared intently at them. An unhinged giggle reached all of their ears at that moment. They turned to find an amused Jennifer. "So it's true. You have evolved." "Nobody thought about telling us?" groaned Kali as she tried to stand back on her feet. "Wouldn't have been very fun if we did. The look on your faces is priceless. Worth almost as much as watching him die." She pointed at Derek in his wolf form as she said those words. Anas hastened and thought he cornered the wolf, seeing that he was trapped between them and a wall. He ran at full speed towards him, but it seemed Derek hadn't given up yet. He launched in Anas's direction just as fast as him, but right before the collision, and in an instant, Derek made the choice to shift back to his human form, wrapped his two arms around Anas's waist, and tackled him to the ground. Then, just as he shifted, he transformed back into a wolf again and scurried back into hiding. "Oh, he's giving you to hell," the druid mocked. "Well, just stand there, don't pitch in whatsoever," Callie complained. "Seriously, what is the point of the two of you? I don't understand why they brought you back. You're as useless as you've always been. And just how useful do you think you have been so far?" Callie turned her hostility towards Jennifer, getting fed up with the treatment she was giving them. "Oh, you really want to try that now? Remember how it ended the last time you turned on me?" "You had your revenge," spat Callie. "Yes, I did. And if that was what I could do then, when I was on a few sacrifices, what do you think I can do to you now?" Jennifer's words sounded like a threat, one that Anas wasn't ready to downplay or risk taking. "Now is not the time," he interfered. "Then when is the time? I think we played good puppets for long enough," Callie responded, her eyes beginning to glow. Derek's suspicions were confirmed. Even though they were there for a shared purpose, the animosity between them truly was palpable. They never resolved their preceding issues. They still dwelled on the past. That was to his advantage. Had they been working in harmony, they'd have probably succeeded in their mission by then, which he suspected to be his death. Unfortunately for him, his plotting was cut short. As soon as he began to think of a way to retreat from the distillery altogether, he started to feel an unpleasant tingling that quickly turned into searing pain. It was like having a parasite, a million small parasites crawling beneath his skin, fighting for dominion over his own body. His breathing grew irregular. His vision became blurry, and soon after, voices were ignited in his mind. They were whispering at first, but then turned into full-blown loud screams. The pressure was too high for Derek to handle, and he dropped to the ground, struggling to keep his eyes open, his muscles spasming all around. "As much as I wish to rip both of your heads clean off your bodies, I can't do that. Not just now, at least. Not while we have a spectator," stated Jennifer, looking in the direction of Derek's hiding spot. Callie and Anas's expressions changed once more. As they followed Jennifer's gaze, they realized that something had changed about Derek's heartbeat. His scent, too, was different. They both grimaced as if they smelled something that made their nostrils curl inside out. "He's dying," exclaimed Anas. "You're doing that?" asked Callie, just as surprised, and even though she wouldn't admit it, just as scared as her partner. "Yes, I can do that. I can do a lot more than that," she spoke, her words sounding like a warning to their ears. Right at the end of her statement, she slowly lifted her arm. Before they started hearing the sound of metal, right at the end of her statement, she slowly lifted her arm. Before they started hearing the sound of metal under growing pressure, they both looked ahead as all the metal in front of them was bending and warping out of its original shape. For a moment they thought they were looking at mere pieces of paper being squeezed into a fist-fitting ball. Finally, Jennifer made a sudden movement, with the same arm she'd lifted before, and just as suddenly as her movement, all of those metal containers and pipes were no more. She'd sent them flying out of their way, only to reveal Derek helplessly lying before their eyes, fighting to stay alive.